I rise to sponsor the proposed national budget for 2016. Foremost, I wish to dedicate this budget to all the victims and survivors of disasters, whether caused by natural hazards, such as typhoons and Lando, among many others, or man-made tragedies such as the Zamboanga siege and the abuse and displacement of our lumads. This budget will cover two administrations, that of the outgoing President, Benigno Aquino III, and the incoming President, whoever he or she may be, in May of 2016. Thus, the continuity of programs that will be funded under this proposed budget must be ensured. This budget is not budget as usual. For many years now, we have been consistently advocating for a paradigm shift in the way we do governance and how we promote development. Faced with the threats of climate change, extreme weather events are now the new normal. We cannot be victims as usual, so we cannot have a budget as usual. We need a budget that not only responds to the basic needs of our citizens, but also properly addresses the risks that threaten the very basic needs we aim to provide our people. We need a budget that reduces and manages existing risks and prevents the creation of new risks. I believe that by now, no one will disagree with me when I say that climate change is perhaps the greatest humanitarian challenge that the world faces today. Developed nations know this. France, which is the host of this year's change talks, COP21, Germany, which has led the way in renewable energy, and even the United States, which is one of the top emitters of greenhouse gases. They have been initiating measures towards energy transition, cutting down fossil fuel consumption to favor clean energy sources. Our own government has committed to reduce GHG emissions by 70% by the year 2030, with the financial and technical support from other nations. Your Committee on Finance has worked to make the 2016 national budget proactively address the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events. Programs, projects, activities for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation, lodged in different agencies of government, amount to 87,935,807,000 pesos, or 4.11% of the total new appropriations under the General Appropriations Bill. This is still a very small percentage, an indication that we have not totally mainstreamed disaster resilience and climate adaptation in government programs. Thus, we have included special provisions that will integrate DRR and CCAM in the programs of government. It is also worth noting that the government has increased allocation for infrastructure projects such as irrigation, road and transport networks, and housing, which at 766.3 billion pesos hits the benchmark 5% of GDP. We have included special provisions in the budget to ensure the construction of safe and resilient structure. We have worked to align the budget with the new Sustainable Development Goals recently passed in September this year. We do not expect it to be able to achieve the global targets yet because the objectives must be incorporated by the agencies themselves when they work on their respective budget proposals. Thus, this early we urge all agencies of government to align their budget for 2017 with the SDGs. We must all be forward-looking and think long-term, lest we remain forever a vulnerable developing nation. We have worked to make this budget a budget that will promote growth. We have provided very specific line items that are responsive to the needs of fisher folks and coastal communities, farmers, rural folks, indigenous peoples. We introduce amendments that will support 4th, 5th, and 6th class municipalities and barangays in the country. The proposed national budget for fiscal year 2016 amounts to 3.002 trillion pesos. On November 10, 2015. Senate received House Bill number 6132. Automatic appropriations is worth 930.7 billion pesos. New appropriations is worth 2,138,604,596,000 pesos, divided into program funds amounting to 2,71,104,196,000 pesos, and unprogrammed funds worth 67,500,000,000 pesos. The House has introduced a provision which states that the availability of maintenance and other operating expenses and capital outlay will be for 2 years. The Senate supports this amendment. Your Finance Chair, along with our 6 Vice Chairs, have diligently conducted hearings, tech briefings, meetings with the agencies of government to extensively discuss and scrutinize all budget proposals. In contrast to the House version, the Senate has proposed new appropriations worth 2,118,604,596,000 pesos, which is 20 billion pesos less in unprogrammed funds. As mandated by the Constitution, the Department of Education is the highest budgetary priority. We have allocated 411,482,790 or 89,000 pesos for DepEd. This is more than 15% of its budget for 2015 because the implementation of the senior high school curriculum under the K-12 program begins next year. Thus, the budget includes for construction of classrooms and the hiring of additional teachers. I wish to highlight, Mr. President, an important amendment we have introduced in this budget. We have deleted all provisions referring to the budget priorities framework that authorizes department heads to reallocate funding because only Congress has the power to approve fund allocations for government programs. In our Finance Chair's vision of transforming the 2016 national budget into a climate and disaster resilient, risk-sensitive, gender-responsive, socially inclusive, and sustainable budget, we have proposed budget amendments and introduced changes to the general and special provisions of the GAB. We wanted to be as specific as possible to show that every agency is capable of using resources towards building sustainable, resilient, and inclusive communities. Support for farmers, fisher folks, rural livelihoods, small entrepreneurs are evident in many of our proposed allocation. The amount of 100 million pesos is allocated for the implementation of the Barangay Kabuhayan Law under the TESDA. Livelihood and skills training centers will be established in 4th, 5th, and 6th classes for employment generation. We included a special provision under TESDA's budget to include traditional skills in their non-formal technical vocational education and training. We've allocated 100 million pesos each for the Department of Trade's DTI One Town, One Product shared services facilities and 10 million pesos for regional trade fairs and exhibitions, programs that support MSMEs. Senator Bam Aquino also included an allocation for the establishment of negosyo centers to promote ease of doing business and facilitate access to services by MSMEs, as well as funding for trade and investment promotion services of DTI. Senator Cynthia Villar boosts government support for the agriculture and fisheries sectors through funding for programs of the Department of Agriculture, such as the provision of agricultural equipment facilities and extension support education and training services, supply service, establishment of technology demonstration, which will provide equipment and training support for our farmers and fisher folks. Senator Sani Angara has introduced funding for the newly amended Public Employment Service Office, PESO Act, and for Rural and Emergency Employment Services Program of the Department of Labor and Employment. Moreover, 3.4 billion pesos is appropriated for the Development Bank of the Philippines as equity contribution of the government and shall be used exclusively for the extension of loans to qualified MSMEs, while 6.5 billion pesos is appropriated for Land Bank of the Philippines as equity contribution of the national government and shall be used exclusively for the extension of loans to qualified farmers and fisher folks. In strengthening the government's capacity to provide social services to our citizens, we have the following proposed allocations. For the conditional cash transfer for 2016 is 62.67 billion pesos that will support 4.40 million households under the regular CCT and 377,000 households under the modified CCT. We've also introduced a special provision under the CCT if we are to end the cycle of poverty and disasters which sets us back. We must equip our citizens, especially the poor, with the know-how, the capacity to be resilient and to be prepared. Thus, in the conduct of family development sessions among CCT beneficiaries, the DSWD shall integrate in the program the protection of the environment, disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation and mitigation, including the preservation of indigenous culture when applicable. The DSWD shall also conduct capacity building programs to prepare its beneficiaries for the of natural hazards. Moreover, in the implementation of the Sustainable Livelihood Program, the DSWD shall converge with the NCCA for the CCT beneficiaries to be taught skills training under the SLTs when applicable. We have also allocated funds for the completion of assistance to victims of past natural calamities and crises. This fund under the DSWD is worth 1,633,130,000 pesos for Typhoon Yolanda victims and 58,879,000 pesos for families affected by the Zamboanga siege. For our elderly population, Senator Ralph Recto has proposed an increase of 2,887,733,000 pesos in allocation for social pension of indigent senior citizens under the DSWD budget. Moreover, the 2016 budget for PhilHealth premium subsidies is worth 43.8 billion pesos, which will cover 15.4 million families and 2.8 million poor senior citizens. Meanwhile, we support the House allocation of 4.773 billion pesos for the payment of the total administrative disability (TAD) pension for surviving spouses of deceased or two veterans and partial payment for TAD pension for living post-war veterans who are at least 80 years of age as of 2016. Mr. President, this is long overdue. It has never been done. Our war veterans have served their country well by putting their lives on the line. It is a shame for a nation not to honor its valiant soldiers with adequate and timely compensation. Further, we strengthen our support for our defense forces, especially with continuing threats to our territorial integrity, such as a dispute over the West Philippine Sea. The continuing modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines should be sufficiently supported, funded without delay. For 2016, funding for the revised AFP modernization program amounts to 25 billion pesos. In terms of law enforcement and public safety, we have to ensure the dispensation and resolution of cases filed in our courts. The government has increased the budget for the judiciary over the years. The 2016 proposed budget for the judiciary is 26.68 billion pesos, 27% higher than its 2015 budget. a budget for 12.9 billion pesos was earmarked for the Department of Justice, 3.25 billion pesos of which is for law enforcement, as he aims to increase the rate of prosecutions to at least 75%, while 236.4 million pesos is for the Witness Protection Program to accommodate the additional state witnesses. Among other noteworthy appropriations are the funding for the rehabilitation and construction of dormitories of our state university, the University of the Philippines System. Senator T.G. Ginggona also included funding for the modernization of the Philippine Normal University, the PNU, for continuous training programs for teachers so we can create a pool of qualified and world-class educators. Your committee, Mr. President, is strongly considering to add capital outlay of 5 million pesos each for each state university and college during the period of amendments. This is in support of other SUCs in their research programs and in building needed infrastructure. Senator Serge Osmeña increased the budget for consultancy services for the Regulatory Commission to cover expected expansion of monitoring operations of the ERC's Market Operations Service and assistance in the review and revision of the relevant rules for distribution and transmissions wheeling rates, setting, and the rules for power supply agreements. In line with our commitment to ensure that our cultural integrity remains intact, we have allocated funds under the National Commission on Culture and Arts for 3 major programs: the preservation and promotion of tangible and intangible Filipino heritage through research, documentation, publication, promotion, exhibition, and film production; scholarships and grants such as funding for schools of living traditions; and third, cultural and heritage mapping projects. With it, a special provision that prohibits the alteration, renovation, or demolition of government buildings and open spaces declared by government cultural agencies or presumed to be important cultural properties without prior approval of the government cultural agencies and proper consultation with stakeholders and cultural groups, to be administered by the NCCA, including the protection of the sightline with regard to built heritage, cultural properties, and cultural landscapes. In undertaking major infrastructure projects, the concerned department or agency shall be responsible specifically in the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of national roads and bridges as they impact on heritage structures or aspects of heritage conservation pursuant to RA 10066 or the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009. We also aim to strengthen the cultural diplomacy programs of the Department of Affairs. We are happy to announce that we have successfully returned to the 2015 Venice Art Biennale after 51 years of absence. Our Philippine Pavilion did not disappoint even international critics and was featured in various local and international art reviews. It has opened doors of vast opportunity for our Filipino artists. We have appropriated funds in a DFA for the country's participation in the Biennale of 2017, the Venice Architecture Biennale of 2016, which is historic because it will be the first time that the Philippines will participate there. Finally, Mr. President, the bulk of amendments and new provisions we introduced for the 2016 national budget is aimed towards our goal of ensuring the resilience of our communities to natural hazards and climate change. The amount of 100 million pesos is provided under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources to support this commission, a long-ignored agency, in its capacity-building programs for local governments for the implementation of the ESWM law. The protection of our marine ecosystems should likewise be a priority of government. The Philippines has 240 million hectares of marine area based on the 200-mile exclusive economic zone. In contrast, the country's land area is only 30 million hectares. We are a maritime nation, but we act like one, as only 5% of our coral reefs are in good condition. We have urged the DNR to immediately address the worsening state of the country's marine ecosystems by creating a major program for coral restoration. Thus, we have allocated 500 million pesos for the National Coral Restoration Program nationwide. Under the Climate Change Commission, we've allocated 50 million pesos for the creation of the Center for Climate Resilience in Clark Green City, which is actually a counterpart of the technical grant from the German government. We're also funding capacity building programs of the CCC for local disaster risk reduction and management offices, as well as the clean energy promotion programs of the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Board and the Renewable Energy Management Bureau, or REMB. Among the amendments and new provisions we introduced are as follows. Critical public infrastructure designed and built to be resilient to earthquake, typhoon, flood, and other extreme weather events. In retrofitting bridges and other public infrastructure, the government shall give priority to areas considered to be highly vulnerable to seismic activity. All agencies and corporations that have supervision over the major dams shall ensure the dams under their respective jurisdiction are properly maintained, managed, and operated with updated and promulgated protocols that take into account climate change and extreme weather events and ensure coordination with PAG-ASA and other agencies of government on precipitation forecast and with efficient and functional water level monitoring system. The Department of Agrarian Reform must provide support to all agrarian reform communities for them to be attuned to CCA and DRR, that increase the resilience of agricultural communities through the implementation of disaster-resilient agricultural infra projects, the distribution of development of seeds that are optimally adaptive to present and to future climate conditions, and conduct seminars and trainings for LGUs in this respect. DRR and CCA programs must be in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, the Philippines' intended nationally determination submitted in relation to the UNFCCC, to the 21st Conference of Parties, and the Sustainable Development Goals pursuant to the Climate Change Act of 2009 as amended by the People's Survival Fund Act of 2012 and the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction Act of 2010. All government agencies and offices and LGUs must earmark a portion of their budget to ensure that protection of biological diversity is integrated and made into their development projects and programs. All national programs, agencies, LGUs, government-owned and controlled corporations are urged to embark on energy efficiency measures and adopt the use of energy-efficient lighting in their office buildings and other public buildings and spaces. The DNR, in the selection of planting sites for the National Greening Program, shall give priority to communities ravaged by extreme weather events, and the planting materials shall be responsive to the needs of the communities. In building education facilities and acquiring new school sites, the DepEd must have design plans that are environment-friendly and consider the geohazards in the location of these facilities. All public schools must install rainwater collection systems and a material recovery facility in a suitable open space within the school premises. Public schools with available lands must establish vegetable gardens. The DepEd must also to preserve and restore the existing Gabaldon school buildings and other heritage school buildings as part of the preservation of the country's cultural heritage. No Gabaldon school building and other heritage schools will be demolished. SUCs, in coordination with the LGUs, shall include in its research program the mapping and inventory of biodiversity in the province where the main campus of the SUC is located. SUCs must also coordinate with the DNR in implementing the NGP, primarily establishment of clonal nurseries, the conduct of forest research, and mangrove reforestation activities. DepEd and SUCs must integrate the following in the respective curricula: environmental protection and awareness, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation and mitigation, indigenous knowledge systems pertaining to agriculture, environment, and cultural heritage. The Department of Interior and local government, meanwhile, should embark on a massive information campaign for LGUs on the said issues. The DILG should assist LGUs in the development of the comprehensive land use plan and in enacting the appropriate zoning ordinances. It must also ensure that all LGUs have a local disaster risk reduction and management office pursuant to the DRR Act, and a council whose purpose is the promotion of culture and arts in all provinces, cities, municipalities, pursuant to the local government code. We discovered that this was an unimplemented provision of the local government code. LGUs, in coordination with the National Housing Authority, shall implement the relocation and resettlement of persons living in danger areas. Resettlement sites must have basic services and facilities and access to employment and livelihood opportunities sufficient to meet the basic needs of the affected families. The barangay, municipal, or city governments shall prevent the construction of any kind of illegal unit within the respective localities. The Department of Public Works and Highways, in controlling soil erosion and slope stabilization in the construction of roads, shall give priority to the use of coconut bioengineering solution in areas where there is available supply and the cost of coconut bioengineering solution is equal or cheaper than the conventional slope protection materials. The DPWH shall include in the design and program cost of road construction projects the planting of trees on both sides of the roads where applicable. It shall also prescribe the design of rainwater catchments to be installed in public areas where applicable. It is the responsibility of a DILG and the DPWH to ensure that evacuation centers are built on safe sites and designed to withstand wind speed 300 kilometers per hour and moderate seismic activity of at least 8.0 magnitude on the Richter scale, to utilize natural ventilation and rainwater through the inclusion of a rainwater catchment system, and to include facilities for the special needs of women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, and such other physical provisions guaranteeing a humane condition for evacuees. The evacuation centers shall be turned over to the concerned, which shall be responsible for the maintenance and operation of the center. The budget includes funding for 4 permanent evacuation centers or buildings per region in the country. It could be increased. For the Department of Tourism, it shall prioritize areas for ecotourism, protected and biodiversity conservation areas, heritage tourism sites, and agro-tourism areas in its tourism promotion activities. For the Quick Response Fund, or QRF, original allocation of 1 billion pesos for the Department of Transport and Communications, Office of the Secretary, was reduced to 125 million pesos. We take note that in 2015, the DOTC did not utilize its 1 billion pesos QRF. The remaining 875 million was distributed to the following agencies considered frontliners in disaster response. Additional 100 million pesos for the QRF of the Agriculture Office of the Secretary. Additional 250 million pesos for the Department of Health Office of the Secretary. Allocation of 250 million pesos for the Department of National Defense Office of the Secretary. Allocation of 100 million pesos for the Bureau of Fire Protection. Allocation of 100 million pesos for Philippine National Police. Allocation of 75 million pesos for the Philippine Coast Guard. I hope and I pray and I urge that the QRF remaining for the next 6 weeks of the year will be used judiciously and proactively. Mr. President, we cannot allow funds lying in government coffers while survivors of disasters wait too long for government support. That is why it is called a Quick Response Fund. Otherwise, the purpose of Congress for creating such allocation is obviously defeated. In closing, Mr. President, I am humbly honored to have been given this opportunity by your good self and my esteemed colleagues to chair the Finance Committee. I share this humble task with Filipinos who think that government has long forgotten or neglected them. our climate refugees, our lumads or indigenous peoples, our farmers and fisher folks, our rural dwellers, our micro and small entrepreneurs, our informal settlers, our suffering commuters, all of whom are greatly vulnerable to disasters and climate change. But if we address this vulnerability, if we reduce the risks in their communities, if we support their micro and small livelihoods, if we promote their skills and their traditions which they have, if we engage them in capacity programs and provide them micro capital, they will become more productive citizens and less dependent on government. We have just successfully hosted the 2015 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, or APEC. President Aquino has concluded his visit to Kuala Lumpur for the 27th ASEAN Summit. But what actually do APEC, the ASEAN Summit, and the emerging ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, mean to the ordinary Filipino? Not much. The national budget is our tool to translate these international economic and trade agreements to measurable gains. It is time that we empower those who are traditionally left out and left behind in every administration, or so sometimes we feel. It is we channel our resources to programs that will ensure sustainability so that we leave our children a healthy and livable country that they deserve. Yes, development is good, but development without conscience destroys our communities. It cannot be development at all cost. We want to leave a legacy budget that is socially inclusive, that is gender responsive, that is climate adaptive, that is attuned towards reducing disaster risks, and mainstreams culture, heritage in every department, something that is also sensitive and responsive to the needs of the vulnerable sectors of our population. And I earnestly hope, Mr. President, that this proposed budget for fiscal year 2016 will merit the approval of our colleagues. Thank you.